The readings today really are calling us to confront a very basic, a very central part of our faith. Who or what is at the center of our lives? What is it that we think about a lot during the day, that we wonder about, that we're dependent on, that we're attached to? Where do we put our attention? For very many of us, our attachments are on power, possessions, prestige, pleasure. 4 P's. Now, sure, for all of us, from time to time, we go down those paths. But for some of us, we spend the hours of our days on these topics. And the readings are telling us today that if that's where we are, if that's where our hearts are, then we're in big trouble. Because all these things, the 4 P's, are passing. That's the 5th P, all passing. The first reading from Jeremiah paints a very powerful picture of what that kind of life is like when we're attached to the 4 P's. The things of the flesh, the things of this world. He says we're cursed if we go down that path, those paths. And he paints the image of this barren bush in the desert. You can just imagine it in your mind's eye. Sitting there on this dry, scorched earth. Nothing else is growing. There's no life there. If we're unlucky enough or foolish enough to depend on power and pleasure and prestige, then we're going down a path where there is no lasting happiness, where there is just dryness. Yes, of course, there's momentary pleasure. We all have had that kind of a rush when we get a new car or something different happens in our life, or we find something that gives us pleasure, but it doesn't last. And then we wind up wanting more. And we want more and more of what doesn't satisfy. And maybe if we have been lucky enough or fortunate enough to turn away from that path and find the way, the capital W way, the way of Jesus, then the Lord can fill that emptiness within us, can fill us up with what lasts. And Jeremiah says, you're fortunate if you change your heart, if you trust in the Lord, because things are going to work out. Of course, you'll still have times of drought, times of heat, but you're not going to dry up. You have a source of water always nearby. And keeping that image of a bush or a tree, your leaves will stay green in those tough times. You'll be bearing fruit. You will survive and do well because you're not attached to one of those false gods. And the psalm that we heard today says the same thing. Happy are those who hope in the Lord. And it's the real happiness. It's not this fleeting happiness of the stuff of this world. The people in the time of Jesus, just like us, were able to choose what God or gods they would worship. There were plenty of pagan gods in that country, in that region. And like today, those pagan gods told us to worship pleasure and power and possessions and prestige. So the people of that day could turn to those gods, or they could turn to the kingdom of God. Would they spend their time hating their poverty, cursing and being jealous of the rich and the arrogant ones among them? Would they be plotting revenge against the Romans who oppressed them? Or would they change their hearts? Would they change and believe in the kingdom of God that Jesus was preaching? You know, he looked at them, he knew they were sorrowful, he knew they had tears. He shared their poverty. So when he said, "Blessed are you who are poor," he wasn't saying, let's all be poor, that's a great way to be. But I think he was saying, you're very lucky if you're not attached to wealth, if you're not attached to something that is never going to satisfy you. And he saw their tears. He shared their tears and their stories. But he's not saying, I don't think, that it's good to be sorrowful, it's good to be having tears. But I think he's saying, you're really lucky if you're not attached to feeling good all the time. If you're not attached to doing those things that give you a momentary rush. In our day, it's alcohol and drugs and sex and the stuff we do, maybe gambling, the stuff we do that gives us good feelings for a while. He's saying if you have the kingdom of God within you, then you can keep all of the things that happen, good and bad. You can keep them in perspective, and you're going to be okay. And he's not saying, I don't think, that it's good if people are mean to you and angry with you and say bad things about you. But you're lucky if you're not attached to having people always buttering you up, getting on your good side. That's a false god. That's a false god of being famous and celebrated. And you're just going to want more and more of that. So it's good if you're not attached to having people always speaking well of you. I think that's what Jesus is saying to those folks today. And he's saying to us too. If we can have at our center the kingdom of God, then we'll be able to keep in perspective everything that happens to us in this life, the good and the bad. And we also will know that what is lasting in our lives is going to be the love of the people around us, the love we have for God. For the kingdom of God is within us and among us, always.